So I guess we'll have to wait for Luis Delpino to show back up. The recording to session 1 ended with him about to explain. Is that him? There we go. Sorry, we're of course limited to our free trial here of Zoom. So Hetero or whoever doesn't have to incur the cost of $14.99 a month.
That's expensive for, you know, a tiny disruption of nothing.
Yes, I miss.
Okay. All right. So did you want to pick up where you left off?
I don't know where we got cut off, but I was trying to explain that the whole is everything or anything and no thing at the same time, due to the fact that because things are changing all the time, they have to stop being what they are in order to become something else. So there must be the zero Kelvin, the non-being, let's put it that way, must be part of the whole. Otherwise, the whole would be a picture and not a movie. Nothing would change, nothing would happen, and consciousness would be impossible, because the consciousness, as we know it, is the dynamic between zeros and ones. It's input, output, processing, etc., etc. So it's data. It's digital data. So I theorize, of course. So I cannot travel to the end of the paper. I don't have the means, but you know, I don't have to go to the end of the paper, because anywhere in the paper is the paper. Reality is everywhere. So it doesn't matter if I look here or if I look on the outside of a star or a galaxy, or between galaxies, between any galaxy. It doesn't matter. I'm always in the paper. I am the paper, as a matter of fact, looking at itself. And yes, the paper is both being and non-being at the same time. Otherwise, it would be a fixed picture and not a moving movie.
You know, well, okay, that's your that's
yeah,
half of an answer, because
it's
addresses
always my
physicalism.
interpretation.
And
it's always my interpretation.
I'm still not quite sure where you get the idea that the paper is and always was.
Well, if it has no beginning and it has no end.
But how do you know?
You could. This is theoretical. I mean, this is my pure reasoning. But
all right.
I know, because I know, I experienced it like that. But you can disagree with it and say, okay, there's a point where the paper stops and there's nothing out there. But
okay,
it doesn't make any sense to me, because if I look at the paper, let's put it this way, if I look at the paper and I pay attention to what the quantum mechanics is telling me, when they look at a very tiny point in space, they see that there is a theoretical zero Kelvin, not practical, because zero Kelvin only exists, and we have to go to Planck, saying that Planck says it, that zero exists only for a very tiny Planck second in a very tiny Planck space. And it cannot avoid becoming a tiny, tiny little one, a tiny, tiny piece of, that's the quantum nature of the empty space. It's just the zero doesn't exist, but for a very short period of time in a very, very tiny space. And that applies to the whole universe. So my thing is, if that's the case, there's no place outside the paper that stays zero forever or for any time. So it has to become a one at some point. That means that the paper never ends, in space or in time. So that's my theory of infinity and eternity.
So go ahead. Someone else wants to speak. Go ahead.
Well, maybe I'll just proffer this idea. While everything you say may or may not be true, Luis, I'm not sure of what practical import it is, if any. And perhaps it doesn't need to have any practical import. Because we're just talking philosophically here, and we like to hear our voices and sounds and so on. And, you know, your opinion, my opinion, it is what it is, blah, 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 blah. But if we look at things from the point of view of each individual, and I believe, and I'm not certain of this, and I'm probably mispronouncing it, misspelling it, and misunderstanding it, is called epistemological ideology. So within each of our consciousnesses, if we think of that like an electron voltmeter, okay, each of us is an electronic voltmeter checking the voltage of all the inputs that we have. And then we have epistemological reality, which Mike Taylor, I'm sorry he's not here, so eloquently described as, Hyro, don't put your finger in a pencil sharpener if you think epistemological ideology is the only thing that matters. So what I'm saying, I guess, is that if we're all voltmeters, but none of us have been calibrated with each other. So we, you know, while Dom's meter is probably the most accurate because he works in that field, he registers 5 volts, but I register 4 volts, and Rami registers 6 volts. The process of trying to calibrate our individual meters to each other is a uniquely human experience, which we think of as the pursuit of knowledge. And if we can come to a consensus of some sort or draw any conclusions, we may have an accurate rendering of the voltage of epistemological reality. I guess that's my kind of.
Joel, that's beautiful.
If I may.
Yes, Rami.
So the key word that I picked out of your statement, Joel, was may. We have to choose our friends carefully, because more important than just being a part of a group, I think, is being in touch with reality. By reality, I don't mean just any reality, but I mean a reality founded on a bedrock of truth. Because at least from that position, you have grounds for hope. You can build a house and it will stay when life gets really rough.
What is truth? You don't know what truth is when you see it. From a movie?
Yeah, I remember that film. And that's sort of a lawyer's argument too, if I recall the context of that statement.
A Few Good Men.
So it may be useful for us within the context of the people who calibrate that they'll all agree, but it doesn't necessarily mean that their observations will be accurate beyond their own group.
Okay. All right. So you both are talking about the same thing. I go back to, hey, I'm sorry if I talk too much, but if anybody wants to say anything else, I'll shut up real quick. But Joel, you said something that absolutely beautiful. It's like, hey, what's the practical import of this kind of discussion? Does it?
Yes, I know. It's like absolutely.
What does that bring? What does that bring to my life?
Kelvin,
what's the big deal? Is the paper is infinite eternal? What does that do to my life? What meaningful import? You said it absolutely in a beautiful way. What practical is it important practically to each individual? And that's in itself, that's how I came to think about the paper, whether the paper was infinite and eternal or not. Because I was trying to find practical import in my life. 20 some years ago, I was not finding a lot of that. And I could not find the answers in other matters. But in this matter, the fact that the paper is eternal and infinite, and knowing that I am the paper,
Okay,
already
you're
put some
reinforcing
things in
a
perspective.
belief. You're pushing a
Because it's
system.
individual. Yes, I am. I'm going to take
Right.
Joel's words and I'm going to say this is of practical import to this individual between these two ears. I cannot make import for you. I cannot tell you what is important or not, and what is practical or not. I can only tell myself what is of practical import.
Why is absolute zero important? That's no energy.
Well, we talked about, zero, the absolute zero Kelvin is where you look and you don't see anything.
You could get
Temperature is Kelvin, the 0 Kelvin, which is minus, I don't know how many degrees, 400 and some degrees, I think it is. There's a
in the
theoretical
Fahrenheit scale, but it's just zero. It's where
yeah, 0 Kelvin is
physicality
zero.
no longer
Yeah.
moves,
In the Kelvin scale, it's zero.
or it becomes
But
static.
they have found out that it's you can only get close to it. You cannot get to it.
But
So,
you said the fact of your belief, which is beyond
Rami, I'm going to explain why it is my belief, and I know it is, and I don't apologize for it,
but
because
beliefs can change.
Joel said it. I can change my mind anytime I want. As a matter of fact, it's funny. Sometimes people say, "Hey, you said this last week, but you say that this week." I say, "Who says I cannot change my mind?" So Joel said it beautifully and asked the question very beautifully. What is the individual practical import of these matters? And we can go into this if you want to talk about it. That's how I got to it. I wanted to find some practical import in my individual understanding of myself, others, and the whole reality. And you said something very much into the same way of thinking, that there's a real reality, which is the paper, the paper we're talking about. And then you say that there's a truth reality. Well, the truth reality is what Joel calls individual practical import. That's true to me, not so true to you. The voltmeters, they measure, but they have to talk to each other, and maybe they agree, maybe they don't. So it's a very good question, Joel. What is the practical, individual practical import of this type of absolutely metaphysical thinking and questioning, which unless you have really, really good technical stuff, measurements, and a lot of paraphernalia to measure, is almost improvable.
No, when you were talking about your facts, you were talking about your beliefs. And when you were talking in terms of the relative, in terms of a group. You weren't talking in terms of absolute. But you started this with absolute zero, the Kelvin scale. So you have a foundation. That foundation is a static universe. You have an understanding that most of what we experience is dynamic and in a constant state of flux. Jairo's brought up a wonderful article for us saying that it sort of loops around on itself, and when you go into negative, it becomes the hottest thing in the universe. I'm not even sure if it would be in the universe. But build off that foundation, because you have a foundation of a sort of a scientific knowledge of it, if not an understanding of one little aspect or piece of the universe. You get an idea of what in literary and in scriptural sense is an understanding of part of the nature of God, the unchanging nature, and how everything comes out of that. So if there is one surety in the world, it's that absolute zeroness is where all else could come out of or arise, because it is the substrate, the base of all, right?
Yes. It's the whole potential, but not actualized. So the 0 Kelvin is where anything could happen. Everything is in there, because it's not in another paper. In every 0 Kelvin of the paper, the whole of the universe is there potentially. I mentioned David Bohm, the physicist that described it elegantly by saying that the paper is holographic. no matter what tiny point you look at inside the paper or of the paper, the whole of the paper is in it potentially. Now, the less actualized it is, the more potential is in there. So you find 100% potential in zero. If you have a 0.0001, okay, well, you have 0.01 actualized, the rest is potential. The more actualized, the less potential.
Can I share something, Louise? I'm going to play there's two sides of the fence. And the side of the fence I'm going to be talking about is the known side, the paper side. Joel brought up a great possibility conversation about practical. That's the practical side. We're on the living side. So now somebody would say, okay, so how does or I would say to myself, how would all the stuff that I'm learning about the known aid me? So then there's another time in my life where I'm about to move on or die. Depends whatever people want to use the words. So now they would say, okay, so all the known stuff, the ones that you're talking about, Louise, and then now forget about the zero, because that's on the other side of the fence. The ones has 1.0, 1.1, 1.2. These are all the different experiences a person has in this realm, known and unknown in this realm. What purpose would it serve me if I'm going into an unknown realm, the other side of the fence with any of this known stuff? So you're talking about theoretically that there's an unknown realm, the essence to things, but you're on this side of the fence. Unless everybody here, as I've said, listen, we've all spent years and months philosophizing, pondering, theorizing about the possibility outside of the material. This is why when you say words such as it doesn't matter, well, you're on the known side. Matter is actually what we're in, the physical part, the material part. But can we actually describe the unknown while we're here, meaning the language? But that's still the unknown on this part, meaning that most people just don't see or ponder the idea of where does language come from? Why have I ignored it? Where does thoughts come from? So when we want to talk about the piece of paper, the world is one thing. Many really never really spend 5, 10, 15, 20 years or even moments thinking about what's the energy or what fuels that piece of paper. But what we can become aware of is all our little dots, as I use the analogy, because I could use anything as an analogy, or like your ones and zeros, but you're sharing a process that you're going through. You're trying to maybe validate or theorize, but only on the known. Because if you're in the unknown, that other unknown, you wouldn't be here.
Yes.
You just wouldn't be here. So unless we're all going to agree, if there's such thing as agreeing, that we're all going to spend all this effort and then we're going to be with each other and we can share with each other, then we're all better off saying, listen, we're going to all make our own YouTube videos and then we all have a choice if we want to hear, and then we can chat on the chat box. Either we disagree or agree because it's actually breaking into our illusion or enchantment. So, but like Joel was saying, how does that bring practical application for the guy that's the construction worker, the guy that just found out he has cancer, but he's not going to die yet. But if he finds out he's going to die, he's been getting confirmation, then he can probe what advantage would it be for me to know anything practical now if I'm going somewhere else I've never even discovered before.
So that's a beautiful question. The unknown, you can talk about it in known terms, but you cannot talk it. So basically, you can talk about moksha, you can talk about yoga, you can talk about nirvana, you can talk about the mystic union or the mystic identification. You can talk about many things in known terms. But when you talk about the unknown, you can talk about it, but you cannot talk it. So the unknown is obviously unknowable because it is non-phenomenal, it's non-tangible. It is besides any tangible, any known rationalization, declaration, observation, feeling, etc., etc. But it's like a coin that has the tangible side and the intangible side. And the two of them don't know each other except for the coin itself. Again, if you only think in conventional human terms, where we either something is or it is not, you come to an impasse, a cul-de-sac, when you look at reality. And at some points, typically at the end of the paper, or the very, very tiny dot on the paper, because you see two dots and you don't see anything between them. The paper is made of dots, quantum dots. They call it a string, the tiniest piece of energy that you can detect anywhere in the universe. It is clear because reality is quantized. I'm not making it up. A lot of people have measured that with very expensive tools. It is clear that the paper is made of little dots, tiny little dots. The problem is, what is between two dots?
I have a question for Rami, the Swami. Is God equal to the known plus the unknown, or is God only the unknown? So we'll never know God.
We can know God.
Then when we know God, will we know the unknown? So there will be only known and no unknown.
Well, that may be what takes eternity.
So
Mike Taylor.
you're saying that the ant cannot know Antara, and that man cannot know the paper fully, and yet you're saying that we can know God, which in your vocabulary is the whole.
Actually, we can know.
We can.
We can know by testing
Okay.
reality.
Good.
Or
I think we agree on that.
And by reality, I mean our perception of what is. Because
Yes.
when you say what is, and when I say what is, our perceptions of the is are sort of like overlapping fields, some of which overlap, other parts don't, but they all exist within the substrate of what is actually, which is always much larger than any species.
So you say we can know God, which I agree with you, as a limit to infinity. But I mean,
That's one way.
Unless you know that you are God, and then you know yourself. But everybody's going
that's
to
a trap.
disagree with you if I say I'm God, and you say no, you cannot be God.
Well, that's a way to.
But you tell me I can know God.
That's a way to make your. That's a way to limit your access to what actually is.
Can I change the name? Instead of saying I am God, I can say I am reality.
Well, what you have is a reality. We all do.
So I am. If I say I am reality, would you agree with me?
Well, I mean, that's kind of like Dolly saying, "I don't take drugs. I am drugs." Okay. Yes, your body is a composition from a chemist's perspective of various minerals and elements formed into molecules, formed into complex structures, so on and so forth. And it would be possible to extract the dopamine from your brain and then sniff it and get a high.
And
but that's, I'm sorry, you're asking?
And this mind?
And I'm sorry, say it again.
Can you extract my mind from me?
Can I extract your mind from you? No, that is not what I could do. But I can interplay with it. I can pass ideas back and forth with your mind.
Can you extract reality from me?
With yours.
Can you extract the whole reality?
I can observe through my ears, through my eyes. That's about all we can have transmitted through Zoom, this internet application. What it is that you're expressing, what you're giving off. But Wittgenstein gave the argument that I think Ghazali had brought up, which is sometimes it's just best to be silent. And then there's a much older idea that comes from before Christ's time on earth, which is a fool. You don't know if someone's a fool until they open their mouth. But now you're married, Louis. You probably know Henry Louis Mencken's quote, perhaps, that a man can be a fool without knowing it, but not if he's married.
And you know it. You're a fool and you know it. I'm afraid we're not answering Dom's very important question, which I would summarize into what good is any metaphysical rambling in my mind if I know I'm going to die in 3 months? Right? Is that a fair question to ask,
Right.
Dom? Dom?
Who's currently on mute.
Dominic?
He
Well,
might have had to step away.
I think I understood the question properly, and he can
It's
come in
actually the
anytime. But
opposite, Louise. It's actually the opposite.
okay,
What purpose
good,
would the
good.
unknown if you're about to die about the physical? Most people spend too much energy playing with the metaphysical in the physical. And this is where, Joel, if I'm misinterpreting how you put this, Joel, was as a collective or as groups, how would it benefit if most people in the group don't even ponder the concept of the unknown?
Yeah. See, you
In the
said it very
unknown.
beautifully. Again, you said very beautifully. You cannot play in, if you play with the metaphysical in the physical, right? What purpose does it serve? The problem is you cannot play with the physical.
But it can
You cannot play
individually.
with the physical. Yes,
Louise,
yes, you can.
it's a self journey when people want to
Yes,
try to
yes,
do both
yes,
at the
we-
same time.
I agree.
But as a group, this is why when we have landmarks of individuals, it doesn't matter if they're philosophers, poets, or whatever, they pursue things. It's like some of the rewards a person will get by learning the craft of music. Not everybody's going to understand. They might understand
That's-
a little bit about what music can do for them, but they're not going to understand some of the benefits that musician
That is
makes
correct.
from it. I don't know about being correct. Again, this is us pleasing each other with these ideals of saying I agree or disagree. Those are pleasantries, and this is how we form attachments. I could care less what other people think personally, because
Do you agree with yourself?
But I'm saying the word. I care less. Care less what people think. I could say I
Do
could
you
care.
please yourself? Don, let me ask you this. Do you please yourself when you agree with yourself?
I ponder myself. I inquire about myself. The self. I've always tried to put it in its place.
Are you trying to please you?
I have my own
By
pleasures.
pondering?
Yes, very much so. And a lot of it, they're attachments. And if I knew you guys well enough, I'd probably bring it up and realize some of my own personal issues that I have.
Right.
But I don't know
right.
you guys well enough, because do you really know yourself well enough? Because we're
So
still,
the answer,
philosophy, Louise, usually for
Yeah.
most people, they're trying to avoid the physical realm. So they'll philosophize about certain abstract
not
ideals.
necessarily. It's
True, very valid point. Not necessarily,
necessarily.
but are we talking about the group or individually or as a collective?
You can only speak for yourself, and so can I. I can only speak for myself, and then if
This is
somebody's
why
around
when-
listening,
This is when
then they can do whatever they want. And
this
but
is why when art challenges you, because you don't always hear yourself. It would be benefited for everybody that actually do want to open up their mouth, as ours was saying, that we actually are. You'll know when you're a fool because we start talking. It's an internal journey. You don't really have to speak it, but we choose to share with each other. But if we're debating with each other outside, what is it really saying about us inside? If we're trying to pose possibilities outside, then what does that say about oneself inside? If one thinks that they're God outside, then they must think they're God inside. Well, then explain each individual person that doesn't speak a word, figure them out. This is a pondering for anybody to do. And then you'll realize that I really
it's a
will never
personal
understand.
choice. It's a personal choice to say something or no.
That's a safe net,
anything.
Louise. That's a safe net, and we all can do that. I'm gonna tag out. It's a safe. It's my choice. It's my views. It's my theory. Like as though we think theory belongs to me.
And who's to say that you're right or wrong? But yourself.
Anybody, including yourself. Anybody can say anything. Anyway, I'm
See,
gonna
this search for pleasing oneself, which is what you call it, which is to agree with oneself, because all that's happening in a consciousness is reality trying to understand itself with a certain degree of clarity. That's what I propose. Is an individual thing. Each mind is on its own. The reality sees itself through an infinity of minds. And then those minds can look at each other sometimes, and they can also try to make sense of themselves. But at the end of the day, it always goes back to the paper, to reality, trying to, unbeknownst to itself, because beyond its non-phenomenal aspect, reality doesn't know anything. It doesn't know, it just is. The paper just is. And then within the paper, on the tangible, phenomenal side, there is this thing, input, output. But on its non-phenomenal side, the nirvana side, the non-thing side, it doesn't know crap. It doesn't know anything, because knowing is part of the tangible side, the phenomenal side.
How do you know?
Blasphemy. Reality.
Again, that's what I know, but don't, just, that's me.
You know what you know.
Knows everything. Reality is omniscient. Reality knows when each of us are going to die. If reality gave us knowledge of when we are going to die, would we?
What dopamine does reality use to know that, or what what's the consciousness doesn't have its own consciousness.
Knows everything about the past, the present, and the future. Then they would.
That's
know
the collective unconscious. You just described it right there. The collective unconscious. The infinite, eternal experience of being, which is under the conscious side of itself.
The collective unconscious, or whatever you want to call it, is part of reality. Therefore, reality knows when each of us is going to die, because reality
but
is
only through a phenomenal consciousness. The zero Kelvin cannot think. It doesn't have any input output. There's no energy.
Only through an individuated phenomenal consciousness that wants to know when it is going to die. So it meditates and retrieves the answer from the collective unconscious.
Man, it's already 8:13.
To die tomorrow. So I will live recklessly and stand in front of a truck and get hit by it. But no, I don't die because I die tomorrow.
So
Joel has a question for us.
What do you think, Mike Taylor?
Well, I was most impressed when I first came on, and Dominic and Luis were talking about the kinds of language that you have to use, and the fact that you can only communicate the things that you're trying to get over if you use terms and ideas that are familiar to the person that you're communicating with. And I think that that's probably a very important point. An example which comes to my mind is this. I'll pass this along if this has any relevance to the conversation. When I study elementary mathematics and I start doing problems in 1 dimensions, 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions, I start drawing graphs, I start drawing geometric figures, and I can see what they look like. I can apprehend what they can look like. Now, it turns out I can move to a higher dimensional realm, which is not at all evident to other people. I can do this fairly simply in some ways by introducing a coordinate system. And in 2 dimensions, I'll have 2 coordinates. In 3 dimensions, I'll have 3 coordinates. And then I can put down this abstraction in which I may have 4 coordinates or 5 coordinates. and I can start reasoning about geometric events that occur in spaces of dimension 4, 5, 6, or any number of dimensions.
Up to 11, I think.
Any number of dimensions, even an infinite
N.
number. Okay.
Okay.
Yes, I can reason at least with regards to certain things. Although I no longer have the sort of intuitive knowledge that I had when I was dealing with 2 and 3 dimensions, because I could share it with people and say, look, this is it. The other knowledge, the more advanced knowledge, I can share only with people who are willing to join in that particular discipline, spend a lot of time in frustration, learning some of the techniques. And after a while, they'll say, ah, I see what you're talking about. Now, one of my favorite pieces of reading was the Discworld series. And in the Discworld series, they mentioned casually from time to time that the color of magic was octarine, which is a color which is not normally visible to human beings. That is an example of a piece of knowledge which in some sense jumps even further beyond the known, the ordinary. I absolutely cannot know what octarine is like in the sense that I know what red and green is like because I directly apprehend and experience them. But I may be convinced if I talk to enough people that occasionally there are some people who really do see octarine. And I may become convinced of its reality, but I may not be able to say very much about it because there's simply not enough common reference for me to deal with. But I may have the feeling also that it's sometimes in my life or sometimes in my existence, it may be possible to get to octarine, or octarine may break in upon me in some circumstances which I do not at all understand.
Yeah, that's the peak moments that they describe. Two questions for you, Micah. I stand in awe what you just said, because it's just, I couldn't agree more with what you just said. The experience of the inexperienceable. Discworld series, who wrote that?
Terry Pratchett.
Thank you.
Can I just interrupt? We only have a minute left, and I'm not sure how the internet is going to be working. Mike, what is the title of your newly released book, and is it for lay people?
It's not for lay people. The title is An Introduction to Geometric Algebra and Geometric Calculus, and it is starting to slowly appear in certain distribution sites. And by the way, if the site shuts off, I will probably take off. Well, no, I can come back for a little while, but then I'm going to have to take off very shortly because I've got something I've got to do later this morning.
And Jairo, what is?
You've gone mute.
Wow, this is beautiful. Thank you for sharing this, Terry Pratchett guy. I'm going already into the octarine. Yeah, I mean, it's just octarine is